Pastor Mark here. Welcome back to the behind the scenes. This is for the Leave and Cleave project. Genesis 2:24 says, leave your mother and father, cleave to your spouse. And so it's shifting your priorities and resetting your family system. So if you go to realfaith.com/cleave, you'll find the sermons, some talks, behind the scenes, some podcasts with my wife and I, and also a 21-day journey workbook to help you look at your family. If you're married, help your spouse look at their family, and then help the two of you figure out how to architect your new family. And so we're doing a little verbal processing behind the scenes here at the Real Faith Studio. And what do you want to get into? What's the question? Yeah.
So last session you were kind of talking about the cutoff phase.
Yeah.
And my question was, how is that biblical? Because back in the olden times, the husband would bring the wife into the house. With the extended family, you didn't really have that biblical cutoff.
Yeah, and so I'll repeat the question if you didn't catch it on the mic. And we posted some of these clips online previous to this series. They went up to 60 million. And this was one of the questions that a lot of people had, like, well, isn't this biblical? And there's this kind of notion in the Old Testament. So there is this notion among some people in the Old Testament that this was an Old Testament family system, okay? So what would happen is, like, here's a couple, and then they have kids, 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 and then they have kids. And that every generation was just layered upon one another. And the thought was, and some people would think, they all lived on the same land, they all lived in the same house. When you got married, you just moved your spouse in. And the problem with this is, first and foremost, it says in Genesis 2:24, and again, this is before sin entered the world, so this is God's perfect divine design. And this is in the King James Version. It says to leave your mother and father, we'll call it mom and dad, and cleave to your spouse. And so you can't cleave unless you leave. It's almost like if you're holding on to your family, you can't hold on to your spouse. And so you let go of your family so you can hold on to your spouse. And it doesn't mean you don't love them. It means that your relational priorities shift. And what this is a totally enmeshed family system. And what that means is people have not left their mother and father. And if you don't leave, you can't cleave. And so you can't get a healthy family system in here. And so what I would say is, does the Bible teach this? Well, yeah. So Jesus quotes Genesis 2:24, and so does the Apostle Paul. So anytime Moses, Jesus, Paul all say the same thing, that must be the way to do it. Now, what you get is, I'll show you. So this is, I'll give you an example. Since we're just verbal processing. So I'll tell you a family system. A family comes to mind. I'll use them as a case study. This is one of my dearest friends, someone I talk to all the time, love very much, and they're a fantastic family. So the backstory is the mom and the dad, they've devoted their whole life to marriage and family ministry, premarital, marriage counseling, marriage retreats. So as far as maturity, these are really mature, godly, humble, kind, spirit-filled, rock star grandma and grandpa. And Bible-based, as solid as can be. So then they've got two sons who are godly and pastors. And those men are married to wonderful women that love the Lord, and they've got kids. So here is where they live. So there is a house right here. It's grandma and grandpa. And then there's a house here. That's son one. And then there's a house here. It's son two. And then this is a lot of grass and fire pit and wiffle ball. And not shockingly, a lot of grandkids spend a lot of time right here. And if you looked at this family system, you would ask, did they leave their father and mother? Yes. A couple of reasons. Number one, everybody's got their own house. So if you're walking around in your underwear, you're not hanging out with your mother-in-law in your underwear. And just as a rule, I would just suggest that. And so yes, they have their own house, and so they have established their own family. In addition, they have had lots of discussions about what the boundaries are. And again, this is on acreage. And so they don't just show up at each other's house. They don't just have keys and walk into each other's house. They have created boundaries that they're all very comfortable with and they have all agreed to. Now what happens is, the one boundary that doesn't exist, guess where the grandkids can always go without calling, texting, emailing, or scheduling an appointment? They can always go to Grandma and Grandpa's place. And they do. So the grandkids will just roll in with Grandma and Grandpa all the time. Grandma and Grandpa will babysit the kids, they'll pray with the kids, they disciple the kids, they have fun with the kids. When either of the couples wants to go on a retreat or get out of town, Grandma and Grandpa they'll pop in and help out. And so in this family system, the point is not that you can't live near each other. It's not saying you can't live next door to each other. You can't work together. Actually, these people all work at the same church. And it isn't that you can't do life together. It's that what you have here, let me say it this way. This is not a family. This is 1, 2, 3 families. And they've agreed on how they want to do it.
Well, thank you for joining us at Real Faith. It's been a supernatural, extraordinary, mind melt year. I could not have fathomed all that the team got done. I'll have Landon share with you in just a moment. But I just want to thank you and thank the team for leading the charge. I got a communications degree before the internet, so I don't know how to do anything that you guys do, but tell them what God did through all your efforts.
So cool. We're super thankful here at Real Faith. So we reached 1 billion views this year. So 1 billion eyeballs saw good, solid Bible teaching. 366 sermons turned into 11,000 pieces of content. 15 million podcast downloads, and 130 countries reached this year from Real Faith, from Scottsdale, Arizona, from our team of, it's like a dozen guys and gals doing our best to reach people for Jesus. So thank you for supporting this ministry. Right now, we have our biggest match ever at Real Faith, a $300,000 matching gift. From now until December 31st, every dollar you give will be matched. So thank you for giving your best gift. Head on down below and give your best gift as we head into 2025 so we can make another epic year here at Real Faith.
In the Old Testament, if you see families living on a piece of land together, it's because they agreed to, if it was a healthy family. And in the ancient world, if you owned land, that land would be passed from one generation to another. In the Old Testament agrarian society, usually whatever your job was, you would teach your kids that. So if you were a farmer, your kids are going to be farmers. If you're doing livestock, your kids are going to do livestock. And so the land really was connected to the family business. And so you would be born and then you would live on the family land. But then let's say you got married, you would negotiate a deal. You say, hey, we want to build our house here. And then somebody else comes along in the family and says, I want to build my house here. Next thing you know, you do have in some agrarian societies in the ancient world and present, you have an extended family living on a large piece of land. But two things. Number one, sometimes the family members leave. They go do something else. We see this with Abraham. It says in Genesis that actually God's calling was on him, so in the book of Joshua, it says that Abraham's father was a godless man who worshiped foreign gods. So he worshiped demons. And God shows up to Abraham, Genesis 11 and 12, and says, I'm calling you to leave your mother and father and to go to another nation. That's a big cutoff. And there I'm going to give you a new piece of land, and your family is going to live on that piece of land. So your extended family is going to stay in the old country, old land. New family is going to go to the new country, new land, and then generations are going to live as a new family in the new land. We now call that the nation of Israel. And so for God to have, this nation, they needed to leave this family in this land. Once they get to Israel, they start doing this. This family has this land, that family has that land. We have a business that's tied to the family. When people get married, they build a home on the family land. Part of this was for support. So in the ancient world, you don't have the same kind of hospitals and transportation and grocery stores. So family had to look out for each other to survive, kind of like homesteading in the early days of the United States of America in the West. Number two, If you wanted to work for the family business, it was best to live there because the family business was off the land, whether it's minerals or livestock or timber or agriculture. In addition, this was an issue of safety because you didn't have the current, police force that we have. And so what would happen is the family would secure their land and they would protect their own and they would protect their assets. So this became a safe place for you to live and to raise your family. Truth be told, the day that we live in, it's not like this. Most of us are not farming or ranching. Most of us are not needing to, get a family compound so that we can survive for generations. In that day as well, they didn't have cars and planes and trains and automobiles and technology, and so they weren't traveling and they weren't relocating, they weren't moving. Now that we've moved to an industrial age, an urban age, many people would never live like this. And so for me, I'll give you an example for me. I was born in County Cork, Southern Ireland, off the Baltimore Harbor. That's not where I was born, that's where my family's from, the O'Driscolls. O'Driscoll means messenger of God. So my family comes from County Cork, Southern Ireland. Potato famine hit. We left the family homestead. We actually had family land, we had a castle on the Baltimore Harbor. And so my relatives, many of them died, jumped on coffin ships, came all the way to the United States of America to start over. My family then went from Ireland to North Dakota, Grand Forks, North Dakota, right on the Minnesota-North Dakota border. And so, let me say it this way. All righty. So this is my family system. So here we are, we're the O'Driscolls, and we're in Ireland, okay? And then a famine hits. And a lot of my family members die from starvation and typhoid, and it's catastrophic. A couple of men, because their wives died, jumped on a coffin ship, and a coffin ship was meant to transport goods, not people, and they called it a coffin ship because people just died on that boat. So then a couple of men land in New York, okay? New York is not where they decided to land and settle because they were farmers. And if you're a farmer, New York's not where you want to be. And honestly, at the time, New York wasn't super warm toward the Irish. So they found a place that had good land, and that was in North Dakota, right on the North Dakota-Minnesota border of the Red River. And it's this fertile plain that floods, so it's really good for farming. So my family ended up here, and as Irishmen, we were potato farmers. That's what we were. So we were planting potatoes here, now we're planting potatoes here. So this would be considered a cutoff. When we went from one country to another, we literally cut off that side of the family. The potato famine for my family was what would be called a nodal event. It was a life-changing event for generations, like tremored the earth for my family and for a lot of Irish. This is where I was born. I was born in Grand Forks, North Dakota, on the family farm. That's where I was born. How do I say this without being too negative? Not everybody in the family was healthy. There were some extenuating circumstances that meant that staying on the family farm was not going to be good or safe for me or future generations. And so now there's another cutoff. And there's another nodal event. My mom and dad and me get in the car and we leave the family that's in North Dakota and we move to Washington. And so I grew up in Washington with 5 siblings. I meet my wife, Grace, there. We fall in love. We have 5 kids there. And then we leave Washington. We have another cutoff. And I do love my family and Grace's family, but we left them behind and we moved to Arizona. And for our family, that was a nodal event. We left schools, church, home, extended family. That's where my wife was born. That's where all my kids were born. Now we're in Arizona. And so when somebody comes to me and they're like, the Bible, everybody's stuck together. Well, yeah, they didn't have cars, planes. A electricity, transportation, and sometimes the reason you want to leave the family land is because, number one, there's a nodal event, like a recession, a terrorist attack. In my event, it was a potato famine. Sometimes you want to leave family because they're toxic, they're dangerous, they're negative. Sometimes it's just opportunity, like there's a better opportunity here. And sometimes it's God's calling. So I would say for us, the reason we're in Arizona, God called us here to do ministry. That's why he brought us here. So it's not that we are rejecting our family, it's that we're obeying our calling. And so now, Grace and I are here, and so there's Grace and I, and then there's our oldest daughter who's married to her husband. They have a son. And then there's our oldest son and his wife and their son. And then our middle son is married. So now we've got 3 families here. And when our other 2 kids get married, we're going to have 6 families. Now, the question is, if we decide to buy a piece of land and live together, can we? Yes. If all of these families agree that that's what they want to do. If I buy a piece of land and say, hey, in the Old Testament, everybody had the same mailing address, I can't do that to my children, because what I'm doing at that point, I am overriding the headship of the husband in each of the families. Because if we're all going to live on a piece of land, all the families need to agree to that, and all the heads of households need to agree to that. And honestly, the people who quote this, if they trace the people that say, well, in the Bible, they all stayed on the same piece of land. If you look at your family, my guess is if you're in America, you probably came here from another country. Because we're a nation of immigrants. And if your family moved into this country, the issue is probably your parents or grandparents have then moved to another part of this country. And at some point, you may be moving to another part of this country. And so by just sort of verbal processing the logic, if what you're saying is you're not biblical unless you live on the land that your family's always lived on, then all of the missionary journeys in the Bible are a sin. The calling of Abraham is a sin. God sending nations into exile is a sin. And it means that everybody who moved in the Bible was sinning, which is impossible, including Jesus, who left his mother and father and left the little town to go into the big city, and he did what God called him to do. So what I would say is, if a family wants to live together, can they? Sure, if that's what they agree to do, because it's healthy, godly, wise. If all the heads of household and families agree, and if they create healthy boundaries to protect the separation of their immediate families. And I'll just close with this, just as a verbal process. This can be really helpful, especially if you're married. Just start looking at your family history and your spouse's family history and just saying, how did we get here? You know, how did we, look at all that has happened to get us here. And then the assumption to be, once we get here, for the next 10 generations, no one will leave. I would say that may denote a high degree of control. And you may be a highly controlling person, and you may be weaponizing the Bible to control your children and grandchildren. And God didn't write the Bible for those of us who are parents and grandparents to weaponize it and control our children and grandchildren, but to allow them the freedom to follow God's calling for their life. So thanks for the question.